Hi, I'm Matthew Giobbi. This is media psychology. So as part of our consideration of media psychology, we also explore the interdisciplinary model of cultural media studies. Now, cultural media studies and the research that's involved in this is much different than the cause and effect framework of the experimental laboratory psychology. What makes cultural media studies quite distinct from the experimental laboratory media effect studies is the idea that the variable that's being studied, the phenomenon, as we talk about in cultural media studies, does not exist in isolation from other things. In a laboratory media effects study, we're going to look at the subject and try to isolate it from what would be called the background noise, all factors that could be affecting it. And that's why there's a laboratory where everything can be controlled. Cultural media studies feels that this is a fruitless venture. In other words, things cannot exist within themselves in isolation. What the media effects folks might call background noise, what the experimentalists might call background noise, the cultural media folks say this is part of the interaction of meaning making. What do we mean by this? Well, if we take a look at this example, a visual example, we see that the meaning of the inner rectangle, the meaning, is relative to the context that surrounds it. Now, this is quite informed by Gestalt psychology, or I should say that Gestalt psychology was quite informed from this idea that meaning is not something that exists in isolation. Meaning is something that's in participation in its context. So if we take here these contexts, perhaps these are two different cultures. It's the idea that a phenomenon takes on meaning within two different cultures. Of course, whatever this phenomenon might be, whatever this internal rectangle is, we can say that perhaps from an empirical point of view, from an experimental point of view, that these are the exact same shades. But when we take in consideration the phenomenology, the experience of the shade within the context of a given culture, we see that the meaning changes quite significantly between the two contexts. So when we're talking about this context, the larger outlying area of the rectangle, what we're really discussing is history. We're talking about economics, history, politics, biology, drives, what we call in psychoanalytic studies the libidinal economy, the political economy, all of the things that make up what culture is participating in this context here. This critical study of media takes into consideration how the context plays into meaning making. So when we're talking about the cultural context, we're talking about fashion and sports and the architecture and the landscape, education system, religion, science, the history, all the things that inform meaning making, all the things we call culture. Our beliefs, our customs, games and technologies and traditions and institutions of culture. And this is what Freud famously said, that culture was born when people stopped hurling stones and started hurling words. Another Gestalt principle of illustration of how the context informs meaning, how something exists within a context, is the figure ground example, as we see here. As we shift the figure to the ground, if we make the black areas the foreground, the background becomes the white area, and the result is we have the meaning of perhaps two faces looking at each other. if we shift this contextual framing, if the figure ground is reversed and we take the black to be the ground and the white to be the figure, we then see an object such as a chalice or a vase. This is a very popular and well-known example of how the figure ground, how the context and object work together in informing each other. In this way, heads and tails, the two sides of the coin, are inseparable. It's the culture, the genetics, whatever, nature, nurture, whatever the questions are, is a very Mobius strip type example or experience where the two are inseparable of one another. It may be the goal of an experimental tradition to eliminate the background and isolate the foreground. The idea here is that once you do this, you have pretty useless information, things that are out of context. We communicate through the creation of symbols, and these symbols convey information and meaning. And we call this language, Morse code, motion pictures, binary code, written text. We look at all of these things as modes of communication. And communication is very much a part of media studies, how we come to create symbolic meaning systems that we exchange. This is what culture is, the symbols of expression that individuals, groups, and societies use to make sense of daily life and to articulate their values. How we articulate our values to one another, our belief systems. When we listen to music, read a book, watch the television, use the internet, we are trying to identify or connect with something or someone. And what we have are cultural artifacts. And culture is a process that delivers the values of a society through its products, through its meaning-making forms. And so what we have is the idea of a culture commodity, or a culture machine. And as we go through this area of media studies, cultural media studies, we'll come to understand that media is the cultural industry that circulates values, that the culture informs the media and the media informs the culture. And in a synergistic way, they feed off of each other. Ultimately, we have is a necessity for the individual who's going into media psychology to be comfortable with the ambiguity of not searching for facts necessarily, but through exploring. I think this was best illustrated by the words of Martin Heidegger, who likened thinking to wandering in the woods. And we wander around the woods and we spend time in the woods. This is the questions that we ask. And when we finally leave the woods, when we're out of the woods, we may not have answers to the questions, but we know the questions really well. We know the woods very well. And I would say one of the main distinctions between cultural media studies versus the media effects studies is media effects folks like to have definite certainty, answers that are provable and valid, have validity and replicable through experimentation. They're more categorical, categorizing and fact type thinking. This is not the way life works. Life is not that easily parsed up into categories, and what we have is a place for that. But in a different context, we explore things without looking for definite answers, without looking for definite facts. We simply come to get to know the questions very well. We become intimate with the questions. Of course, this is the tradition of cultural studies and phenomenology. So we take into consideration, of course, the principles of the Gestalt. And the principles of the Gestalt, of the cultural Gestalt, is the idea that things take on meaning based on their organization. So we have here an illustration. Of course, we recognize this as a bicycle. These are different shapes or different parts of the bicycle. It does not become a bicycle until it's organized in a certain way. These shapes could be organized into a variety of different things. The meaningfulness of bicycleness, the bicycleness of the bicycle, does not come into being until it's organized in a certain way. It's not the thing in itself that has the meaning, it is the context, the organization of the thing, the structure of the thing. And things can be restructured in different ways. This is what art does. This is what architecture does. It takes things, rearranges it in new ways that create new ways of seeing things, new ways of viewing things and experiencing things. So we are going to talk in this lecture about the eras of communication and technology, how we've proceeded from an oral communication to a written communication, from speaking to writing, and then into what could be called mass communication, into print, which is not written but printed, mechanical printing, the mass production of printing. We then shift to an electronic age, and finally now to a digital age. And we're going to look at these eras of communication and technology and how they affect how we communicate with one another, and the effect that this communication, the medium, has on the technology, has on the, not only on the message, but on the receiving and the transmitting of the message. So we have a tradition that goes from oral to written to the mechanical print, electronic to the digital. And we're designing cultural messages and delivering them to large and diverse audiences through media channels. Just as we've understood, as we see through the Lev Kuleshov effect, how context informs the content, how the syntax informs the semantics, we can take and enjoy this little piece from filmmaker Alfred Hitchcock and listen to Hitchcock explain what we have discussed here, the context and the cutting and meaning of the film.
We call it cutting. It isn't exactly that. Cutting implies severing something. It really should be called assembly. Mosaic is assembling something to create a whole. Montage means the assembly of pieces of film which, moved in rapid succession before the eye, create an idea. Of course, the most elementary form is the juxtaposition of imagery in various sizes. You know, a lot of people think that cutting is, or we'll say montage or assembly, is taking a man from one place to another and jumping into a close-up of him, which Griffith invented, it's true. But to me it goes much deeper. And as I say, the picture Psycho contained quite an amount of cinematic approach to this, to its basic content. In the first place, we had in it the murder of a woman in a shower, of a nude woman. Now, as you know, you could not take the camera and just show a nude woman being stabbed to death. It had to be done impressionistically. So it was done with little pieces of film. The head, the feet, the hand, the parts of the torso.
Shadow on the curtain.
Everything, you see, was used. The shower itself. I think in that scene there were 78 pieces of film in about 45 seconds. Now, that's one kind. Now we'll take another kind, which I would prefer to call, say, the orchestration. Loud notes, soft notes, and so forth. The second murder in Psycho was treated quite differently. It showed a detective coming up the stairs, the audience already aware that a monster was around. So they were apprehensive for him, but they didn't know when it was going to happen. So I have this man mounting the stairs in what we would call a medium shot, a waist shot. And he gets to the top of the stairs. Then I take the camera and put it very, very high, way, way high, above the ceiling almost, as though we're looking down on the whole thing. And a little figure runs out with a raised knife. And the hand goes up with the knife into the air and starts to bring it down. Now remember, these are two tiny figures. Then the next cut is a big head of the man as the knife goes across his face. Now, this is size of image put together to create shock. In other words, if it were music, it would be tremolos on the violin and suddenly a brass instrument, which is the big close-up. And from that he fell and went back. So there's an illustration of using the size of the image to create shock, or whatever you will. Now the third way is what one might call pure cinematics, the assembly of film, and how it can be changed to create a different idea. Now we have a close-up. Let me show what he sees. Let's assume he saw a woman holding a baby in her arms. Now we cut back to his reaction to what he sees, and he smiles. Now what is he as a character? He's a kindly man. He's sympathetic. Now, let's take the middle piece of film away, the woman with the child, but leave his two pieces of film as they were. Now we'll put in a piece of film of a girl in a bikini. He looks, girl in a bikini, he smiles. What is he now? The dirty old man. He's no longer the benign gentleman who loves babies. That's the difference. That's what film can do for you.
Or you for it, as it were.